Chapter 1. The Frozen Trail. The cold came first as a whisper, then as a scream. Clara Miller pulled her wool traveling cloak tighter around her shoulders, but the fabric, so fine and fashionable in Boston's parlors, might as well have been paper against the Wyoming wind. Her fingers, even wrapped in kid leather gloves, had lost all feeling an hour ago. She tucked them beneath her arms and tried not to think about the letters folded in her reticule, the ones written in Arthur Vance's careful, measured script, promising safety, security, and a new beginning at Fort Laramie. She tried not to think about how none of those letters had mentioned love. "Miss Miller," the guide, a grizzled man named Coogan, who reeked of whiskey and tobacco, twisted in his saddle to look back at her. His face was nearly invisible beneath the brim of his hat and the scarf wrapped around his neck. "Storm's coming in faster than I figured. We need to make the creek crossing before it hits full." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Her teeth chattered so violently she'd bitten her tongue twice already, and the metallic taste of blood mingled with the ice crystals forming on her lips. The supply wagon lurched over another frozen rut, and she gripped the wooden seat until splinters bit through her gloves. Above them, the sky had transformed from pale gray to something darker, angrier. It reminded Clara of her father's face in those final months, when the consumption had hollowed him out and the creditors had begun circling like vultures. Don't think of that. Don't think of the funeral, the empty house, the auctioneer's voice cataloging everything she'd ever known into lots and numbers. Don't think of how desperate you were to answer that advertisement in the Matrimonial Gazette. "How much farther?" she managed to ask. "Fort's another 8 miles, give or take, but the crossing's just ahead. Once we're over, we can shelter in them rocks if we need to." If we need to. The words hung in the air like a premonition. The wind picked up, and with it came the snow, not the gentle, picturesque flurries Clara remembered from Boston Common, but something wild and furious, as though the sky itself were angry at their presumption for being out in it. Within minutes, she could barely see Coogan's back. The world became white noise and stinging ice.
"Miss Miller!" Coogan's voice was nearly lost in the howl. "Stay close! Don't—" The wagon horse screamed. Clara felt the world tilt sideways before she understood what was happening. The horse reared, eyes rolling white with terror, and the wagon's momentum carried it forward even as the animal tried to bolt backward. The harness snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Clara grabbed for the seat, the rail, anything, but her numb fingers couldn't hold on. She hit the snow hard enough to drive the air from her lungs. For a moment, she lay gasping, staring up at the furious sky, watching the snow fall into her open mouth. Move, get up, but her body wouldn't obey. The cold was inside her now, seeping into her bones, making her limbs feel like lead. "Coogan!" Her voice was barely a whisper. She tried again, louder. "Coogan!" No answer came except the wind. Clara rolled onto her hands and knees, crying out as pain lanced through her left ankle. Twisted, maybe sprained. She blinked snow from her eyelashes and looked around frantically. The wagon was gone. No, there. She could just make out its dark shape already yards away, disappearing into the white. And Coogan! She saw his horse's tracks, heading in the opposite direction. He'd left her. The realization came with a strange sort of calm. Of course he'd left her. What was one Eastern woman compared to his own survival? She was already dead weight, already a burden. She'd been a burden since the moment her father had coughed blood onto his law books and the world had started crumbling. "No!" Clara spoke the word aloud, fierce despite her chattering teeth. "No, I did not come this far to die in the snow like some tragic heroine in a dime novel." She tried to stand, but her ankle gave out immediately. The pain was sharp and bright, cutting through the numbness. She fell again, catching herself on her hands, feeling snow and ice pack beneath her palms. Her reticule, still miraculously looped around her wrist, swung against her arm. Inside it, Arthur's letters rustled. "I can offer you security, Miss Miller, a home, respectability. I am not a romantic man, but I am an honest one. Honest. Yes, he'd been honest about what this marriage would be, a transaction, a contract, two people joining forces against the harsh realities of frontier life. She'd accepted those terms because security and respectability were more than she had in Boston, where she'd been days away from the poorhouse or worse. But he'd also written, the territory is unforgiving to those unprepared for it.
Clara laughed, a bitter, broken sound. Unprepared. What an elegant word for about to freeze to death because her guide abandoned her in a blizzard. She began to crawl. She didn't know where she was going, away from the open ground, towards some darker shape in the white that might be rocks, might be shelter, might be nothing at all. Her hands sank into drifts up to her wrists. Her skirts, heavy with ice and snow, dragged behind her like an anchor. The wind screamed in her ears, and her ankle throbbed with each movement. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, she reached an outcropping of rock. It offered some protection from the wind, a small hollow where the snow hadn't yet drifted too deeply. Clara collapsed against the stone, drawing her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around herself. Her whole body shook so violently she thought her bones might rattle apart. She should keep moving, she knew that. To stop in cold like this was to die, but her body had reached its limit. Her eyelids were so heavy, the shivering was almost worse than the cold itself, taking the last of her strength. Clara thought of her mother, dead these 10 years, thought of her father and his disappointed eyes when she told him she was answering a matrimonial advertisement. My daughter, marrying some frontier shopkeeper, what would your mother say? She thought of Arthur Vance, waiting at Fort Laramie for a bride who would never arrive. She thought, strangely, of the painting that had hung in her father's study, a scene of the American West, all golden light and noble savages and pristine wilderness. How laughably wrong it had been. There was nothing noble about dying alone in the snow, nothing pristine about the way ice crystals formed in her eyelashes, or how her lips had cracked and bled, or how her fingers had gone from painful to numb to nothing at all. The white was everywhere now, even when she closed her eyes. And then, through the white, a shadow. Clara's eyes flew open. She tried to focus, but her vision swam. A shape, darker than the snow, moving with purpose. A horse, she thought, and on it a rider. Fear should have come then. She was alone, helpless, and someone was approaching. But Clara found she had no fear left, only a distant, detached curiosity. If death was coming, at least it had a shape now. At least she wouldn't die alone. The rider came closer, materializing out of the storm like something from a fevered dream. Not cavalry, the silhouette was all wrong. Not Coogan returned with conscience-stricken rescue. This figure sat the horse differently, moved differently, was different in ways Clara's cold-dulled mind couldn't quite process. The rider dismounted in one fluid motion and crouched before her. Through the white haze consuming her vision, Clara saw a face, broad cheekbones, dark eyes, skin the color of copper. Long black hair whipped in the wind. A man, a native man. Lakota, perhaps, or Cheyenne. Her Boston-bred mind supplied a dozen words, most of them ugly, all of them wrong for this moment. She waited for violence, for scalping knives and war cries, and all the lurid tales she'd half believed despite her better judgment. Instead, the man spoke a single word in a language she didn't understand, his voice deep and surprisingly gentle. Then he switched to broken English. "You die here." It wasn't a threat, it was a fact, delivered with the same certainty as a doctor's diagnosis. Clara tried to answer, to explain that yes, she knew that, thank you very much for the observation, but her mouth wouldn't form words anymore. The shivering had stopped, which some distant part of her mind recognized as very, very bad. The man reached out, and Clara felt strong arms slide beneath her knees and shoulders.
She was lifted as though she weighed nothing, cradled against a chest covered in fur and leather that smelled of smoke and sage and horse. Heat radiated from him, beautiful and terrible, and Clara heard herself make a sound that was half sob, half sigh. "Safe," the man said, and Clara didn't know if he was promising or hoping. The world tilted as he lifted her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. One arm wrapped around her waist, holding her secure against him, while the other guided the horse into the storm. Clara felt the animal's warmth beneath her, the man's warmth behind her, and the contrast with her own frozen body was almost painful. She tried to stay conscious, to mark the direction they were traveling, to remember she was being taken somewhere by a stranger who owed her nothing. But the darkness was so welcoming, and she was so very, very tired. The last thing Clara saw before unconsciousness claimed her was the steady fall of snow, each flake catching what little light remained, turning the world into something almost beautiful. The last thing she felt was the steady beat of the stranger's heart against her shoulder blade. And the last thing she thought, before thought itself fled, was that Arthur's letters had never mentioned that survival might come from the most unexpected places. Then there was only darkness and cold and the sensation of movement through an endless white world.
Chapter 2. The Shelter of Strangers. Warmth was the first thing Clara became aware of. Not the distant promise of warmth, but actual heat soaking into her frozen limbs like water into parched earth. It hurt. God above, it hurt worse than the cold had, 1,000 needles pricking her fingers and toes as sensation returned with cruel insistence. She whimpered before she could stop herself. Awake. That same deep voice from the storm, closer now. Not a question, a statement. Clara's eyes flew open, and for a disorienting moment she couldn't make sense of what she was seeing. Curved walls, not wooden planks, but something woven. Branches and hides, she realized, bent into a dome shape. A fire burned in a small pit at the center, its smoke rising through a hole in the roof. Furs were piled everywhere, beneath her, around her, over her. The air smelled of wood smoke and cured leather and something herbal she couldn't identify. She wasn't dead, that was the first coherent thought. The second was, where am I? Clara tried to sit up, and pain lanced through her ankle. She gasped, falling back against the furs. Foot hurt, you lie still. The man appeared in her line of sight, crouching beside the fire. In the flickering light, Clara could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd thought, perhaps 30, perhaps less. His face was all strong lines and sharp angles, with a prominent nose and a mouth that looked unused to smiling. His hair fell past his shoulders, black as midnight, with a single feather worked into a thin braid near his temple. He wore buckskin leggings and a shirt decorated with what looked like porcupine quills, and his movements had an economy to them, a deliberate grace that suggested every motion served a purpose. He was, Clara realized, with a flush of shame at the thought, the most striking man she'd ever seen. He was also watching her with dark, unreadable eyes. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Every story she'd ever heard about captivity, about what happened to white women who fell into the hands of savages, came flooding back. She was alone, injured, completely at this man's mercy. And mercy, the story said, was not something to expect. But he'd saved her, carried her through the storm to shelter, built up this fire, piled these furs over her. Those weren't the actions of someone who meant her harm, were they? Where? Clara's voice came out as a croak. She swallowed and tried again. Where am I?
The man gestured around them with one hand. My place, winter camp. He paused, seeming to search for words. Safe from storm. The storm. Memory came crashing back. The wagon, Coogan's abandonment, the terrible cold. How long was I?
One day, one night, he turned back to the fire where something bubbled in a small pot. You sleep long time. Good. Body need. A day and a night. Arthur would be frantic. Or would he? Did he even know she was supposed to have arrived? Clara's hand went to her wrist, but her reticule was gone. The letters, her few possessions, all of it vanished into the snow. The man noticed her searching. Your bag. Here. He retrieved the reticule from somewhere behind him and held it out, not coming closer, letting her decide whether to reach for it. Clara extended her hand slowly, half expecting what? She didn't know, but he simply placed the bag in her palm and retreated back to the fire. She clutched it to her chest like a talisman. "Thank you," she whispered, then louder. "Thank you for saving my life." He inclined his head slightly, but said nothing. "I'm Clara Miller." It seemed important to establish herself as a person, a human being with a name and an identity, not just some helpless creature he'd rescued. The man noticed her searching. Your bag, here. He retrieved the reticule from somewhere behind him and held it out, not coming closer, letting her decide whether to reach for it. Clara extended her hand slowly, half expecting what? She didn't know, but he simply placed the bag in her palm and retreated back to the fire. She clutched it to her chest like a talisman. "Thank you," she whispered, then louder. "Thank you for saving my life." He inclined his head slightly, but said nothing. "Hawk." He touched his chest. "I am Hawk." "Hawk," Clara repeated. It suited him somehow, this silent, watchful man. "Are you Lakota?" The word felt presumptuous on her tongue, as though she were claiming knowledge she didn't possess. "Lakota," he confirmed. Then after a pause, "No tribe now. I walk alone." There was a story there, Clara sensed, layers of meaning in those simple words. But before she could ask, Hawk lifted the pot from the fire and poured steaming liquid into a wooden cup. He approached her slowly, as one might approach a skittish horse, and held out the cup. "Drink. Make strong." Clara took it with shaking hands. The cup was warm against her palms, blessedly, painfully warm. She brought it to her lips and sipped carefully. The broth was rich and gamey, flavored with herbs she didn't recognize. It tasted like survival. She drank deeply, feeling the heat spread through her chest and belly. When she finally lowered the cup, Hawk had returned to the fire and was stirring something in a smaller bowl. "Your hands," he said without looking at her. "Show me."
Clara set down the cup and pulled her hands from beneath the furs. In the firelight, she could see that her fingers were swollen and discolored, the tips an alarming shade of white-gray. Frostbite. She'd read about it, heard stories, but seeing it on her own hands sent a spike of fear through her chest. Will I lose them? The question came out steadier than she felt. Hawk crossed to her and knelt, taking her right hand in both of his. His touch was gentle, clinical, his calloused fingers carefully examining each of hers. Maybe not. We try. He reached for the bowl he'd been stirring and scooped out a thick, pungent paste. This hurt. You be brave. I'll try, Clara said, though she wasn't sure she believed it. Hawk began applying the paste to her fingertips, and Clara bit down on her lip to keep from crying out. It felt like fire, like acid, like every nerve ending was screaming in protest. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she held still, watching his bent head as he worked with meticulous care. "What is it?" she managed through gritted teeth. "Medicine, from plants, from tree bark. My grandmother teach me." His voice was matter-of-fact, focused on his task. "White man call it frost medicine? Winter heal?" "A poultice," Clara supplied, recognizing the concept, if not the specific ingredients. "Poultice," Hawk repeated carefully, as though tasting the word. "Yes, poultice make blood come back, make fingers live." When he finished with her right hand, he wrapped it carefully in soft leather, then moved to her left. The process was repeated, and Clara found herself watching his face instead of her hands. There was such concentration there, such careful attention. This was a man who took his responsibilities seriously, even when that responsibility was a stranger who'd fallen into his path by accident. "Why did you help me?" The question slipped out before Clara could think better of it. Hawk paused, meeting her eyes for the first time since he'd begun treating her hands. "You ask why I not leave you to die?" Clara felt her cheeks burn. Put like that, it sounded monstrous. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean—" "You afraid of me?" It wasn't a question. Clara couldn't deny it, though shame curled in her belly. "I don't know you." "No." Hawk returned to wrapping her hand. "You know stories, white man stories, Indian savage, take women, kill children, yes?"
His bluntness startled her into honesty. "Yes." "Some stories true. Some white men also do these things. Some Lakota, some Cheyenne, some all people." He tied off the leather binding and sat back on his heels. "I help because you need help, because leaving you is wrong, is not—" He struggled for the word, his brow furrowing. "Not honor." Honor. The word hung in the air between them, simple and absolute. "I'm sorry," Clara said quietly, "for believing the stories without question." Hawk shrugged, rising to his feet. "Stories have power, make people afraid, make people hate. Sometimes stories more dangerous than arrows." He returned to the fire and ladled more broth into her cup. "You sleep more. Body's still cold inside. Need time." He was right. Even with the fire and the furs, Clara could feel an exhaustion so profound it seemed to emanate from her bones. But sleep meant vulnerability, meant trusting this stranger completely. As if reading her thoughts, Hawk settled himself on the far side of the fire, putting the flames between them. "I stay here, you sleep there, safe." It was, Clara realized, a promise. And despite everything, despite a lifetime of warnings and prejudices, she believed him. She burrowed back into the furs, cradling her bandaged hands against her chest. Through half-closed eyes, she watched Hawk tend the fire, his profile sharp and still in the dancing light. He began to hum, a low melodic sound that might have been a song or simply a way to fill the silence. The wind howled outside the shelter, but inside it was warm. Inside, against all odds and expectations, Clara felt safe. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that she never asked Hawk why he walked alone, cut off from his tribe. What had driven him to this solitary existence on the frozen plains? But that, she supposed, was a story for another time. For now, she let the darkness take her, lulled by the crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of that wordless song. Chapter 3. The Language of Survival. The storm raged for 3 more days. Clara marked time by Hawk's routines, the way he built up the fire at dawn, checked the smoke hole to ensure it remained clear, rationed their supplies with careful precision. She watched him prepare meals from dried meat and roots stored in leather pouches, boil snow for water, tend to his horse tethered just outside the shelter's entrance. Every action was purposeful, efficient, honed by years of solitary survival. On the second morning of her captivity, though Clara was beginning to question whether captivity was the right word, she insisted on sitting up despite Hawk's frown of disapproval. "I can't lie about like an invalid," she protested, struggling with the furs. "I'll go mad." "Foot still bad." Hawk gestured to her ankle, which was indeed swollen and bruised in spectacular shades of purple and green. "Then I'll sit still, but I need to sit, not sprawl." Clara managed to prop herself against a bundle of hides, arranging her skirts as modestly as possible. The borrowed fur wrap Hawk had given her helped, though she was acutely aware that her traveling dress was filthy and torn, her hair a rat's nest without proper pins or a brush. She must look like something the cat dragged in. The thought made her laugh, a sharp, slightly hysterical sound. Hawk looked up from the pot he was stirring, concern flickering across his usually impassive face. "You hurt?" "No, I just—" Clara waved a bandaged hand helplessly. "I was thinking how improper this all is. A week ago I would have fainted at the thought of being alone with a man, unchaperoned in such intimate quarters. Now here I am, and all I can think is how grateful I am for the warmth." Hawk considered this, head tilted slightly. "White people have strange rules." "You have no idea," Clara muttered. Then, curious, "Don't the Lakota have rules about men and women?" "Yes, many rules." Hawk ladled broth into 2 cups. "But rules for tribe, for people together. I have no tribe now. Rules." He made a gesture like something floating away. "Different." Clara accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing briefly despite the bandages. "You said you walk alone. May I ask why?" For a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. He settled across the fire from her, staring into the flames. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than usual, each word chosen with care. "My family die. 3 winters past. White man sickness. Small spots?"
"Smallpox," Clara whispered, horror clutching at her chest. "Smallpox," Hawk repeated, the word heavy on his tongue. "My mother, father, 2 sisters, little brother." He touched his chest over his heart. "I have medicine dreams, see spirits. Grandmothers say I walk between worlds, so I live when others die." "Oh, Hawk," Clara's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry." He shrugged, but there was nothing casual in the gesture. "After, I stay with tribe, but everywhere I look, I see ghosts. My mother by cookfire, my father with horses, my sisters." He stopped, jaw working. "One day, I take my horse, I go. Chief angry, but he let me go. Say I dishonor family by leaving. Maybe he right." "No," Clara said fiercely. "Grief has no rules. No one can tell you how to survive it." Hawk's eyes met hers, and something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps. Fellow mourners who understood loss in all its raw, unmerciful truth. "You lose someone?" Hawk said, not a question. "My father, last spring, and then everything else." Clara found herself talking, the words spilling out like water from a cracked dam. She told him about the consumption that had eaten her father alive, about the debts that appeared like vultures after the funeral, about the auction that had scattered her life to strangers, about the matrimonial advertisement and Arthur's careful letters, and the desperate hope that had brought her west. "This man, Arthur, you love him?" Hawk asked when she finished. "I've never met him," Clara admitted. "He seems decent, practical. He offered me a future when I had none. But not love." "I didn't think I had the luxury of love." Clara stared into her cup. "I thought survival was enough." "Survival is not living," Hawk said quietly. "I know this. I survived 3 winters, but not live. Not until—" He stopped, something shifting in his expression. Then he rose abruptly and moved to check his supplies, clearly ending the conversation. Clara wanted to press, to ask what he'd been about to say, but she understood the need for walls. Some wounds were too fresh to expose. Instead, she said, "Teach me something, please. I'll go mad if I just sit here." Hawk glanced back at her. "Teach what?" "Anything. Something useful." Clara gestured at the shelter around them. "How to, I don't know, prepare food, recognize useful plants. Say something in Lakota." A smile ghosted across Hawk's face, so brief she almost missed it. "You want to learn Lakota?" "Why not? I'm a captive audience." The joke felt weak, but his smile deepened fractionally. "Not captive, guest." He returned to the fire and pointed to himself. "Wichasha, man." Then to her, "Winyan, woman." Clara repeated the words carefully, stumbling over the unfamiliar sounds.
Hawk corrected her pronunciation with patience, and slowly over the next hour she learned basic words. Fire, water, horse, sky, snow. Oh, there were apparently many words for snow, each describing different kinds, different qualities. Your language is beautiful, Clara said, marveling at the complexity, like poetry. All language beautiful if you listen, Hawk replied. He pointed to the pot. Now I teach cook, you help. Over the following days, a routine emerged. Each morning, Clara's bandages were changed, a process that grew less agonizing as her fingers slowly regained their color. Hawk showed her how to prepare pemmican, grinding dried meat with berries and fat. He taught her to judge the fire by sound as much as sight, to know when wood was needed before the flames began to die. He carved her a pair of simple utensils and showed her the proper way the scrape hides, though her injured hands could do little more than make clumsy attempts. In return, Clara taught him more English. They sat across the fire from each other, trading words like gifts. She learned that his name wasn't simply Hawk, but something longer in Lakota, Chatan Kinyan, which meant hawk flying. He learned that Boston was a city by the sea, that Clara had once studied literature and music, that her father had been a lawyer before the consumption destroyed him. You read words from paper? Hawk asked, fascinated. Make marks mean things? Yes, I can teach you if you'd like. His eyes lit with something Clara was beginning to recognize as hunger, not for food, but for connection, for knowledge, for the company he'd denied himself for 3 long winters. Yes, he said simply, I like learn. So Clara used a charred stick from the fire to write letters in the smooth earth near the entrance. A, B, C. Hawk studied them with intense concentration, copying the shapes until they were perfect. Within 2 days, he could write his name in English letters. Within 4, he was sounding out simple words. You're a quick study, Clara said, impressed. Need be quick to survive, Hawk replied, but his expression was pleased. It was on the 5th evening, as they shared a meal of rabbit Hawk had somehow snared despite the continuing storm, that Clara realized she was happy. Not content, not merely surviving, but genuinely happy. She was warm, fed, learning, conversing with someone who saw her as more than a burden or a problem to be solved. Someone who treated her like an equal despite their wildly different circumstances. She looked up from her food to find Hawk watching her, his dark eyes reflecting firelight. What? Clara touched her face self-consciously. Do I have something? You smile, Hawk said. First time you smile like that. Real smile is good. Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. I suppose I don't have much to smile about usually. Now you do, Hawk said. Then, as if the words surprised him, he looked away quickly and busied himself with his meal. But something had shifted. Clara felt it like a change in air pressure before a storm, that crackling, electric sensation of something building. When her eyes met his across the fire, she saw her own awareness reflected back at her. This was dangerous. She was promised to another man, was supposed to be married by now to Arthur Vance at Fort Laramie. She was a white woman from Boston society, and Hawk was a Lakota warrior living in self-imposed exile. Nothing about this made sense. And yet, that night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in her nest of furs, listening to the wind and to Hawk's steady breathing from across the shelter. Her hands throbbed less now. Hawk's medicine was working. Soon she would heal completely. Soon the storm would break. Soon she would return to civilization and the life she'd chosen. The thought sat in her stomach like a stone. Clara, Hawk's voice came soft through the darkness. You wake? Yes, she whispered back. I'm sorry. Did I disturb you? No. A pause. You think too loud. Despite herself, Clara laughed quietly. That's one way to put it. She heard rustling as Hawk sat up. His silhouette was visible against the fire's dim glow. "What you think about?" Clara should have lied, should have said something innocuous about missing Boston or worrying about the storm. Instead, she found herself saying, "About how strange it is that I feel safer here in a shelter made of branches with a man I barely know than I ever felt in my father's house, or in the boarding house in Boston, or—" She trailed off. "Or this Arthur man," Hawk finished quietly. "I shouldn't say such things."
"Why not? It's true, yes?" "Yes," Clara admitted. "But it doesn't change anything. I have responsibilities, commitments. Arthur is expecting me. He's probably organized a search party by now. Storm too bad for search. When storms stop, I take you back." Hawk's voice was carefully neutral. "I promise you go back safe." "I know you will." Clara sat up, pulling the furs around her shoulders. She could see Hawk more clearly now, his face half in shadow. "You're an honorable man, Hawk." "You sound sad when you say this." "Do I?" Clara's laugh was brittle. "How strange." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything they weren't saying. Then Hawk rose and moved around the fire. He stopped an arm's length from Clara, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. "Your hands," he said. "I checked them." It was an excuse, and they both knew it. But Clara held out her hands obediently, and Hawk knelt beside her, carefully unwrapping the leather bindings. His fingers were gentle as he examined her healing skin, testing each fingertip for sensation. "Better," he murmured. "Much better. You keep them all, I think." "Thanks to you." Clara's voice came out husky. Hawk didn't release her hands. Instead, his thumbs traced small circles on her palms, and Clara felt that touch all the way to her core. She should pull away. This was improper, dangerous, impossible. She didn't move. "Clara." Her name on his lips was like a prayer and a question combined. She looked up and found his face inches from hers. In the firelight, his eyes were fathomless, dark as the winter sky. She could see the slight part of his lips, the rapid pulse in his throat. He wanted to kiss her. She could see it in every line of his body, in the careful control he was exercising. But he wouldn't, not unless she— Clara closed the distance between them. The kiss was tentative at first, a brush of lips that sent shockwaves through her entire body. Hawk made a sound low in his throat and cupped her face with both hands, deepening the kiss. Clara's fingers tangled in his hair, and she was lost in the taste of him, in the solid warmth of him, in the way he kissed her like she was precious and necessary, and his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hawk rested his forehead against hers. "This is," he began in Lakota, then switched to English. "Dangerous. You belong to other man." "I don't belong to anyone," Clara said fiercely. "I'm not anyone's property." "But you promise him. You come all this way to marry him." "I promised him before I knew—" Clara stopped. "Before I knew what? That there could be this? That someone could look at me and see me, not just a solution to a problem?" "Before you knew what?" Hawk prompted gently. "Before I knew what I was giving up," Clara whispered. Hawk closed his eyes briefly, pain flickering across his features. Then, with visible effort, he pulled back, putting space between them. "Storm will end, maybe tomorrow, maybe next day. Then you choose. I take you to Fort, to Arthur. You marry him, live white life. Or—" He stopped. "Or," Clara's heart hammered, "or you come with me." The words came out raw. No teepee, no tribe. Hard life, winter cold, summer hot, always moving. But he met her eyes, free and not alone. It was insanity. Everything Clara had ever been taught, every rule of society and propriety screamed against it. She would be ruined, cast out. She would lose everything.
Except she'd already lost everything, hadn't she? And what was she gaining in return? A loveless marriage to a practical man who saw her as a useful acquisition? A life of respectability and slow suffocation? "I can't answer now," Clara said finally. "It's too much, too fast." Hawk nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You sleep. Think. When storm end, you tell me." He returned to his side of the fire and lay down, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, could hear the change in his breathing. She lay back down as well, but sleep was impossible. Her lips still tingled from his kiss. Her hands, cradled against her chest, could still feel the warmth of his touch. Outside, the wind began to ease. The storm, it seemed, was finally breaking, and Clara had no idea what she was going to do.
Chapter 4. The Return to Civilization. The morning dawned cold and mercilessly clear. Clara woke to find Hawk already up, dismantling their shelter with efficient movements. The sight sent a spike of panic through her chest. He was packing. They were leaving. The impossible decision she'd avoided all night was here, now, demanding an answer. "Hawk." "Storm over," he said without turning around. "Snow stop. Wind die. Sun come up." He rolled a bundle of furs and tied them with practiced ease. "Good day for travel." His voice was carefully neutral, his back to her a wall she couldn't breach. Clara struggled to sit up, her healing ankle protesting the movement. She'd slept fitfully, dreams chasing her through corridors of choice. Arthur's face, cold and disappointed. Hawk's eyes, dark with longing. Her father's voice asking what kind of woman throws away respectability for passion. "What if I don't want to go?" The words escaped before Clara could call them back. Hawk's hands stilled on the leather cord he was tying. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then slowly he turned to face her. The morning light cast his features in sharp relief. The strong lines of his face, the wariness in his eyes, the careful control of his expression. "You not sure. You afraid. This good. Mean you think careful." "I am sure," Clara protested, though even as she said it, doubt curled in her stomach. "I don't want to marry Arthur. I want—" "You want what you feel here." Hawk gestured to the shelter, to the dying fire, to the small world they'd created together. "But you not know what you lose. Family, white life, your people." He crossed to her and crouched down, his face level with hers. "I give you nothing but hard road, cold winters, hungry times. White people look at you, see—" He struggled for the word. "Betrayer? Someone who leave her kind?" "Traitor," Clara supplied softly. "Yes, traitor." Hawk's jaw tightened. "And for what? For man with no home, no tribe, who walk alone because he too—" Again that struggle with language. "Too broken to be with people?" "You're not broken." Clara reached out, cupping his face with her still tender hands. "You're healing. There's a difference." Hawk closed his eyes briefly at her touch, and when he opened them again, Clara saw the raw need there, to believe her, to accept what she was offering, to take the gift of her presence and never let go. But then he pulled back, standing with a fluid motion that put distance between them. "We go to fort. You see Arthur. You see white life again. Then, if you still want come with me."
Wait, 1 day, 2 day. You think clear, no storm, no... He gestured between them, struggling. "No, this feeling pushing you." Clara wanted to argue, to insist she didn't need to see Arthur to know her heart. But Hawk was right, and she hated him for it. She'd made one desperate choice that had brought her west. Was she about to make another desperate choice without fully understanding the consequences? "All right," she said finally, the words tasting like ash. "We'll go to the fort." Relief and pain warred across Hawk's face in equal measure.
He nodded once, then returned to his packing. Within an hour they were ready to leave. Hawk had fashioned a crude crutch for Clara from a sturdy branch, and he'd packed everything with the same meticulous care she'd come to expect. His horse, a sturdy paint mare he called Winyang Washde, which he'd translated as good woman, stood patiently while Hawk secured the bundles. "I ride behind," Hawk said, helping Clara mount. "Keep you steady. You tell me if ankle hurt too much." Clara settled into the saddle, and Hawk swung up behind her with easy grace. His arm came around her waist, holding her secure, and Clara couldn't help but remember the night he'd rescued her, how this same position had been her salvation. Now it felt like a sweet torture, being so close to him, yet knowing each step of the horse carried her away from what they might have been. The journey to Fort Laramie took most of the day. The landscape was transformed by the storm, buried under drifts that sparkled like diamonds in the harsh sunlight. Hawk guided the horse with unerring instinct, finding paths Clara would never have seen, reading the land like a book written in a language only he understood. They didn't speak much. What was there to say? But Clara was intensely aware of every point of contact between them, his chest against her back, his thighs bracketing hers, his breath stirring the hair at her temple. She memorized it all, hoarding sensations like a miser hoards gold, because soon there would be walls between them. Soon there would be propriety and expectations and the weight of civilization. It was late afternoon when Fort Laramie came into view. The fort sprawled across the plain like a small town, all wooden buildings and stockade walls, with smoke rising from dozens of chimneys. Even from a distance, Clara could hear the sounds of human inhabitation, voices, hammering, the lowing of cattle. It should have been welcoming. It should have felt like rescue. Instead, it felt like a prison gate swinging open. "There," Hawk said, quietly, pointing. "Your people."
Clara wanted to correct him. Not her people, just people, but the word stuck in her throat. Because he was right, wasn't he? These were her people by birth, by blood, by every social contract she'd ever been taught to honor. The fact that she didn't feel any kinship with them was irrelevant. Hawk reined in the horse about a quarter-mile from the fort's main gate. "I take you closer, soldiers maybe shoot. They not—" He searched for words, "not friendly to Lakota now." "What do you mean?" Clara twisted to look at him, alarm flooding through her. "Wars, battles. White men want gold and black hills. Lakota say no, much fighting." Hawk's expression was grim. "I hear stories from travelers, soldiers angry, Lakota angry, not safe for me go close to fort." Guilt crashed over Clara. She'd been so absorbed in her own dilemma that she hadn't even thought about the danger Hawk was putting himself in by bringing her here. "Then don't take me any closer. I can walk from here." "No." Hawk's arm tightened around her waist. "I'd take you close enough they see you, close enough you safe." His voice dropped. "Then I go." "Hawk!" "You remember what I say. I wait, you decide. If you want come with me." He paused, and Clara felt him reach into his shirt. He pulled out something small, wrapped in leather, and pressed it into her hand. "You show this at edge of fort, tomorrow or next day. I see it, I know you come. I wait there." He pointed to a stand of cottonwoods about half a mile to the east. "If you not come after 2 days, I know you choose Arthur. I go. I not—" His voice cracked, and he didn't finish. He didn't need to. Clara unwrapped the leather with shaking hands. Inside was a small carved bird, a hawk in flight, its wings spread wide. It was exquisite, every feather detailed, and she realized with a lump in her throat that he must have carved it during those long nights when she'd been sleeping, whittling away by firelight. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "You beautiful," Hawk said simply. Then, before Clara could respond, he urged the horse forward.
They rode in silence until they were perhaps 200 yards from the fort. Already Clara could see figures on the walls, could hear shouts of alarm or excitement. The gates were opening, people were emerging. Hawk stopped the horse and dismounted, then helped Clara down. She swayed on her feet, and he steadied her, his hands on her arms. "You be safe now. Your people take care of you."
Hawk, Clara didn't know what she wanted to say. Thank you seemed inadequate. I love you was too soon, too raw, too terrifying. I'll come back assumed a choice she hadn't fully made. So instead, she reached up and touched his face one last time, feeling the sharp line of his jaw, the warmth of his skin. 2 days, she said. I'll have an answer in 2 days. Something flickered in his eyes. Hope, fear, resignation, all tangled together. He nodded once, then stepped back, releasing her. 2 days, he repeated. Then he mounted his horse in one smooth motion and turned away. Clara watched him ride off, her heart in her throat. The small wooden hawk was clutched so tightly in her hand that its edges bit into her healing palm. She stood frozen, unable to look away, until Hawk was just a speck on the horizon. Miss, are you all right?" Clara turned to find a group of men approaching from the fort, soldiers in blue uniforms, a few traders, and in the lead, a man she recognized from the daguerreotype he'd sent with his letters. Arthur Vance. He was exactly as advertised. Average height, thinning brown hair, a face that was neither handsome nor unpleasant. He wore a neat suit and carried himself with the straight-backed bearing of a man who prided himself on order and propriety. "Miss Miller?" He stopped a few feet away, his eyes sweeping over her disheveled appearance with something between concern and distaste. "Good God, woman, what happened to you? We've had search parties out for days. Coogan said you disappeared in the storm, said he looked everywhere but couldn't find you." Coogan said. Clara felt a flash of anger so hot it surprised her. Coogan, who'd abandoned her without a backward glance, had apparently rewritten history to make himself the hero of a tragedy instead of a coward who'd run at the first sign of trouble. "I got lost in the storm," Clara said, her voice sounding strange and distant to her own ears. "Someone found me, took care of me, brought me back." Arthur's eyes flicked to the horizon where Hawk had disappeared. Someone? Who? Does it matter? Clara was suddenly profoundly exhausted. Her ankle throbbed, her hands ached, her heart felt like it was being pulled in 2 directions at once. "I'm here. I'm alive. Can we please go inside?" Arthur's expression tightened at her tone, but he nodded. "Of course. You must be exhausted. Mrs. Henshaw at the boarding house has kept your room ready." He offered his arm with mechanical courtesy. "Come, let's get you warm and fed, and then we can discuss everything." Clara took his arm because refusing would cause a scene, and because her ankle truly couldn't support her weight much longer. But as they walked toward the fort, surrounded by curious onlookers and Arthur's efficient chatter about preparations and postponed plans, Clara kept her other hand closed tightly around the carved hawk. 2 days, she promised. 2 days to make a choice that would define the rest of her life. The boarding house gates swung shut behind her with a finality that echoed in her bones. The boarding house was warm and crowded, smelling of lye soap and boiled beef. Mrs. Henshaw, a robust woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, immediately took charge, shooing Arthur out and helping Clara to a small room on the 2nd floor. "Poor dear, look at you," Mrs. Henshaw clucked, helping Clara out of her ruined traveling dress. "Mr. Vance has been beside himself with worry. Well, as beside himself as that man gets, anyway." She paused, shooting Clara a knowing look. "Not the warmest fish in the pond, is he? But solid, dependable. That counts for something." Clara said nothing, too numb to defend or disparage her would-be husband. "You'll want a bath, I expect, and some proper food. I'll have the girls bring up water, and there's a dress here that should fit you. Belonged to a soldier's wife who passed through last month.
Mrs. Henshaw bustled about, laying out towels and a simple gray dress. "You just rest now. Everything will look better in the morning." But when morning came, nothing looked better. Clara lay in the narrow bed, staring at the rough wooden ceiling, listening to the sounds of the fort coming to life outside her window. Her body was clean, her belly was full, her hands and ankle were properly bandaged by the fort surgeon. By every practical measure, she was better off than she'd been in days. So why did she feel like she couldn't breathe? Arthur came to call after breakfast, bringing flowers, hothouse blooms that must have cost a fortune out here, and a carefully prepared speech about postponing the wedding another week to give Clara time to recover. "I've spoken with Reverend Mitchell," Arthur said, sitting stiffly in the room's only chair, while Clara remained on the bed, propriety be damned. "He suggests we wait until you're fully healed. It wouldn't do to have you limping down the aisle, and besides," he cleared his throat, "I think we should perhaps get to know one another a bit better before we proceed, under the circumstances." "What circumstances?" Clara asked flatly.
Arthur shifted uncomfortably. "Well, there's been talk about who rescued you, about where you've been these past days." Ice flooded Clara's veins. "What kind of talk?" "Miss Miller, Clara, please understand, I'm not making accusations. I'm merely reporting what people are saying." Arthur leaned forward, his expression pained. "Coogan told everyone that an Indian rode off with you during the storm. Several people claim they saw you arriving yesterday with a native man. And now you're back, but you're—" he gestured vaguely at her. "Changed somehow, distant." "I nearly died in a blizzard," Clara said, her voice hard. "Forgive me if I'm not bubbling over with joy." Of course, of course." Arthur stood and began pacing. "But you must understand my position. I have a reputation here, a business. If there's any question about your virtue, about what happened during those days—" The wooden hawk was hidden under Clara's pillow. She could feel its weight there, a secret pressed against her skull. "Are you asking me if I've been defiled, Mr. Vance?" Arthur flinched at the bluntness. "I'm asking if there's anything I should know before we proceed with our arrangement." Arrangement. Not marriage, not union, not partnership. Arrangement. Clara looked at Arthur, really looked at him for the first time. She saw a man who valued propriety over passion, reputation over truth, appearances over reality. A man who'd brought her flowers not out of joy at her survival, but because it was the expected thing to do. A man who was already calculating how to minimize the scandal of her rescue, rather than thanking God she was alive. He wasn't a bad man, but he was the wrong man. "Mr. Vance," Clara said carefully, "I think we need to have a very honest conversation about what we both want from this marriage." Arthur stopped pacing. "I thought we'd already established that. I need a wife to help run my household and business. You need security and a home. It's a fair exchange." "An exchange?" Clara repeated. "Like a business transaction?" "Well, yes." Arthur looked confused. "What else would it be? We barely know each other, Miss Miller. I'm offering you practical benefits, and in return, you'll provide me with companionship and eventually, God willing, children. It's how these arrangements work." "And if I told you I wanted more than that?" Clara asked softly. "If I told you I wanted partnership and passion, and someone who sees me as more than a useful acquisition?"
Arthur's face closed down. "Then I would say you've been reading too many romantic novels, Miss Miller. This is the frontier, not a Boston salon. Romance is a luxury we can't afford here. What matters is survival, stability, building something that lasts." He wasn't wrong. Everything he said made logical sense, but logic, Clara was discovering, had very little to do with the heart. "I need time," she said finally. "Not just a week, more time, to think, to heal, to be certain this is what I want." "How much time?" Arthur's voice was clipped. "I don't know," Clara met his eyes, "but I won't marry you until I'm sure you deserve that much honesty." For a long moment, Arthur said nothing.
Then he nodded stiffly. "Very well. Take your time. But Miss Miller, Clara, please understand that my patience, while considerable, is not infinite. I've already waited longer than expected. I can't wait forever." "I understand," Clara said. After Arthur left, Clara pulled the wooden hawk from under her pillow and turned it over in her hands. 2 days, Hawk had said. 2 days to choose between the life she'd planned and the life she'd never imagined possible. 1 day was already gone. Tomorrow she would have to decide. Chapter 5. The Cage of Duty. Clara spent the next day trying to convince herself that marrying Arthur was the sensible choice. She made lists in her mind, tallying advantages and disadvantages like entries in a ledger. Arthur offered security, respectability, a roof over her head, and food on her table. He was educated, relatively prosperous, not unkind. He would never beat her or abandon her. Their children, should they have any, would grow up with advantages, schooling, society, a name that meant something in this raw territory. With Hawk, she would have, what? A life on the run, moving from place to place, never quite belonging anywhere? She would be shunned by white society, distrusted by the Lakota because of her skin. She would sleep on the ground more often than in a bed, would go hungry during harsh winters, would bear children with no future beyond survival.
The choice should have been obvious. And yet, Clara stood at her window that evening, watching the sun set over the Wyoming plains in streaks of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, in that stand of cottonwoods, Hawk was waiting. Had he made a fire? Was he cold? Was he wondering if she would come, or if she'd already chosen the safety of civilization over the uncertainty of him? "Miss Miller," Mrs. Henshaw's voice came from the doorway. "Mr. Vance is downstairs, says he'd like to take you to supper at the office's mess, if you're feeling up to it." Clara turned from the window, smoothing her borrowed dress. "Of course, tell him I'll be down shortly." The officer's mess was the closest thing Fort Laramie had to fine dining, a long room with rough-hewn tables, oil lamps casting pools of yellow light, and the smell of roasted meat mingling with tobacco smoke and whiskey. Arthur led her to a table near the back, where 2 other couples were already seated. "Clara, allow me to introduce Captain William Hendricks and his wife Margaret, and Lieutenant James Forrester and his wife Elizabeth." The introductions were performed with careful formality. "This is Miss Clara Miller, my intended." The word intended hung in the air like a claim, a declaration of ownership that made Clara's skin prickle. But she smiled and nodded, taking her seat as Arthur held out her chair. Margaret Hendricks was a plump woman with kind eyes and graying hair pulled into a severe bun. "Oh, my dear, you're the one who was lost in the storm. How absolutely terrifying. You must tell us everything." "There's not much to tell," Clara said carefully. "I got separated from my guide. Someone found me and brought me to shelter until the storm passed." "Someone?" Captain Hendricks leaned forward, his eyes sharp beneath bushy eyebrows. "Would that someone be the Indian buck folks saw you riding in with?" The word buck made Clara's hands clench in her lap. She forced her voice to remain level. "He saved my life, Captain." "Lucky for you he did, though I'm surprised he brought you back instead of taking you to one of their camps. Usually when they take white women—" "William," Margaret interrupted firmly, "that's hardly appropriate dinner conversation." "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking," the captain grumbled, but he subsided. Elizabeth Forrester, a younger woman with a pinched face and pale blue eyes, spoke up. "You must have been so frightened, Miss Miller, alone with a savage for days. I would have been beside myself." "He wasn't—" Clara stopped herself, recognizing the futility of arguing. These people had made up their minds about Hawk, about all Indians, long before she'd arrived. Nothing she said would change their fundamental beliefs. "I was grateful for the shelter," she finished quietly. Arthur patted her hand, a possessive, patronizing gesture.
Clara was very brave, but she's safe now, thank God, and that's what matters. The conversation moved on to other topics: territorial politics, the railroad's expansion, gossip about various fort personnel. Clara picked at her food, barely tasting it, acutely aware of how Arthur included her in the conversation only peripherally, answering questions directed at her before she could speak, subtly correcting her when her opinions differed from his. Actually, Clara said at one point, when Arthur had just explained her views on education without consulting her, I believe Clara's from Boston, you understand, Arthur interrupted with an indulgent smile. Very progressive ideas from back east. She'll adjust to frontier reality soon enough. The others laughed, and Clara felt something inside her wither. This was what her life would be: being talked over, having her thoughts dismissed, her experiences interpreted by a man who believed he knew better simply by virtue of being a man. After dinner, Arthur walked her back to the boarding house. The night was cold but clear, and Clara could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. She remembered lying beside the fire in Hawk's shelter, watching sparks rise through the smoke hole, feeling more seen and valued in silence than she had in all her years of Boston drawing rooms. "You're very quiet tonight," Arthur observed as they reached the boarding house steps. "I'm tired," Clara said. It wasn't entirely a lie. Of course. Arthur took her hand, the first time he'd voluntarily touched her beyond the perfunctory. "Clara, I know this has been difficult for you, the storm, the rescue, all the talk, but I want you to know that I'm committed to making this work. Once we're married, once you settle into life here, all of this will fade into memory." "Will it?" Clara looked at their joined hands. Arthur's grip was correct, but passionless, a formality rather than a connection. "Arthur, can I ask you something?" "Certainly." "Do you love me?" The question came out baldly, without artifice.
Arthur blinked, clearly taken aback. "Love? My dear, we barely know each other." "That's not an answer." He shifted uncomfortably. "I have great respect for you. I believe we'll suit each other well. Love, as I understand it, is something that develops over time through shared experiences and mutual effort. I'm committed to building that with you, if you're willing." It was a reasonable answer, a mature, sensible answer. It was probably more honest than half the professions of love that led to marriage, and it made Clara want to weep. "I see," she said softly. "Thank you for your honesty." "Clara," Arthur's grip tightened slightly, "I know I'm not a romantic man. I know I can't offer you poetry or grand gestures, but I can offer you safety, stability, a good life. Isn't that worth something?" "It's worth a great deal," Clara agreed. "But is it worth everything?" Arthur's expression flickered with something that might have been frustration or concern. "What more do you want?" "Everything," Clara thought. "I want to be seen. I want to be valued for who I am, not what I can provide. I want someone who looks at me and feels their heart race. I want passion and partnership and the wild freedom of choosing my own path, even if that path is hard." But she couldn't say any of that. Not to Arthur, who would hear only foolishness and feminine hysteria. "I don't know," she said instead. "I'm still figuring that out." "Well?" Arthur released her hand and stepped back, his face closing down. "I hope you figure it out soon, Clara. I'm a patient man, but my patience has limits. Good night." He turned and walked away, his back rigid with disappointment or anger or both. Clara watched him go, then climbed the stairs to her room with leaden feet. That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in the dark, turning the wooden hawk over and over in her hands, feeling its smooth curves, the careful detail of each carved feather. Hawk had made this for her during those quiet nights by the fire, pouring his skill and care into something meant only for her eyes. Had Arthur ever made anything with his own hands?
ever created something simply for the joy of giving. Clara rose and went to the window, pressing her forehead against the cold glass. The fort was quiet at this hour, only the occasional sound of sentries calling out to each other as they made their rounds. Beyond the walls, the plains stretched endlessly, and somewhere out there, Hawk was waiting. Tomorrow was the second day, the last day of his vigil. If she didn't signal him by nightfall, he would leave, would assume she'd chosen Arthur and civilization. He would disappear back into the vast wilderness, and she would never see him again. The thought made her chest tighten with something that felt like drowning. Clara thought about her father, about the life of genteel poverty they'd led in Boston. He'd been a good man, her father, but worn down by trying to maintain appearances while his world crumbled around him. He'd worked himself to death trying to preserve a facade of respectability that ultimately meant nothing. Was that what she wanted? A respectable life that slowly suffocated her? She thought about her mother, dead these 10 years from influenza. In her last moments, delirious with fever, she'd gripped Clara's hand and whispered, "Don't waste it, my darling. Don't waste your one precious life being what others expect. Promise me." Clara had promised, though she hadn't understood what her mother meant until now. She thought about the women at dinner, Margaret Hendricks with her kind eyes and resigned smile, Elizabeth Forrester with her pinched face and judgmental tongue. Were they happy? Or had they simply learned to accept less than they dreamed of, to make peace with lives that were safe but small? And then she thought about those days in the shelter with Hawk, the way he'd cared for her injuries with such gentle attention, the way he'd taught her words in Lakota, patient with her stumbling pronunciation, the way he'd listened when she spoke, really listened, as though her thoughts and feelings mattered, the way he'd looked at her, not as a problem to be solved or a possession to be acquired, but as a person of inherent worth and interest, the way he'd kissed her, like she was both precious and essential, the way he'd offered her freedom, even knowing it meant hardship. Clara pressed her hand flat against the window, feeling the cold seep into her palm. In the darkness, she could just make out the shape of the cottonwood stand where Hawk waited. It was perhaps half a mile away, an easy walk if not for her still healing ankle, if not for the walls and gates and guards between here and there, if not for every rule of society and propriety she'd ever been taught. What was she so afraid of? Poverty? She'd already been poor in Boston, had already known what it was to go hungry, to wear threadbare dresses, to accept charity. At least with Hawk, poverty would come with purpose, with love, with the bone-deep knowledge that she was chosen for herself rather than for her utility.
Scandal? She was already the subject of gossip. Marrying Arthur wouldn't erase the whispers. It would only confirm what people already suspected, that she was damaged goods making the best of a bad situation. Hardship? Life with Arthur would be hard in different ways. The hardship of living a lie, of pretending contentment, of slowly forgetting who she was beneath the layers of dutiful wife. The unknown? Perhaps. But wasn't the unknown what had brought her west in the first place? She'd answered a matrimonial advertisement and traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger. That had been a leap into the unknown, made from desperation and hope in equal measure. This would be another leap, but this time it would be made from love. Love. The words settled into Clara's chest like a key turning in a lock. She loved Hawk. It had happened quickly, impossibly, but there it was, solid and undeniable. She loved his quiet strength, his careful hands, his patient teaching. She loved the way he saw her clearly and valued what he saw. She loved his loneliness that matched her own, his courage in choosing solitude over the pain of staying where ghosts haunted him. She loved him, and love, real love, was worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for, worth choosing, even when the choice was hard. Clara turned from the window, her mind suddenly clear. She knew what she needed to do, but first she owed Arthur the courtesy of a proper goodbye. Morning came cold and bright. Clara dressed carefully in the borrowed gray dress, pinning her hair up with the few pins Mrs. Henshaw had provided. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand, pale, thin, with shadows under her eyes from sleepless nights. But there was something else there, too, something new, a certainty in her gaze, a set to her jaw. She looked like a woman who'd made a choice and was prepared to live with the consequences. Clara made her way to Arthur's trading post just as he was opening for the day. He looked up from the ledger he was examining, surprise crossing his face. "Clara, I wasn't expecting you this early." "I know. I'm sorry to intrude on your work." Clara stepped inside, closing the door behind her. The trading post smelled of leather and tobacco and coffee, masculine smells that would have been familiar if she'd married Arthur, if she'd spent her days helping him run this business. "But I needed to speak with you, privately." Something in her tone must have warned him. Arthur set down his ledger slowly and came around the counter. "You've made a decision." "I have." Clara twisted the wooden hawk in her pocket, drawing strength from it. "Arthur, you're a good man, an honorable man. You deserve someone who can give you what you need, a helpmate, a partner in building your business, eventually a mother for your children. But that someone isn't you." Arthur's voice was flat. "No." Clara met his eyes steadily. "I'm sorry. I know you've been patient. I know you've made preparations, invested time and money in bringing me here, and I'm grateful, truly. But I can't marry you when I know my heart belongs to someone else." Arthur's face hardened. "To the Indian, to that savage who took advantage of a vulnerable woman? No." Clara's voice came out sharp as a whip. "He didn't take advantage of me. He saved me. He cared for me. He treated me with more respect and consideration than—" She stopped herself, but the implication hung in the air. "Than I have," Arthur finished bitterly. "Is that what you were going to say?" Clara softened her tone. "Arthur, you've treated me exactly as you see fit, as a practical arrangement, a solution to mutual needs, and there's nothing wrong with that for people who want the same things. But I realized something these past few days. I don't want safe if safe means empty. I don't want respectable if respectable means pretending to be less than I am. I want—" She paused, searching for words. "I want to feel alive, even if that means being uncomfortable, even if it means hardship." "You're a fool," Arthur said quietly. "You'll regret this. When winter comes and you're cold and hungry, when you're ostracized by every decent person, when you realize what you've thrown away." "Perhaps," Clara acknowledged, "but they'll be my regrets, earned by my own choices, not someone else's idea of what my life should be." Arthur stared at her for a long moment, then he shook his head and turned away, bracing his hands on the counter. "I should have known. The moment I heard you'd been with him for days, I should have known you were ruined." The word stung, but Clara didn't flinch. Ruined. What an interesting word, as though I'm a piece of merchandise damaged in shipping. "Aren't you?" Arthur's voice was harsh. "In the eyes of society, in the eyes of God? I am a woman who survived a blizzard, who was shown kindness by a stranger when others abandoned her, who learned that there are different kinds of strength, different ways to live. If that makes me ruined, then I'll bear that label with pride."
"Get out!" Arthur didn't turn around. "Take whatever you brought with you and go. I won't have you under my roof another hour." "I understand." Clara moved toward the door, then paused. "Arthur, I do hope you find what you're looking for, someone who fits the life you want to build. You deserve that. And you deserve whatever fate has in store for you," Arthur said coldly. "I just hope it's not as harsh as I suspect it will be." Clara left the trading post with her head held high, though her heart ached. Not for Arthur. She knew in her bones she'd made the right choice there. But for the burning of bridges, for the finality of this moment. She could never come back now, never seek shelter if things went wrong. She was committing herself completely to an uncertain future, with only love as her compass. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. It was, she realized, the first truly free choice she'd ever made in her life. Chapter 6. Beyond the Walls. Clara returned to the boarding house to find Mrs. Henshaw in the kitchen kneading bread dough with vigorous efficiency. The older woman looked up as Clara entered, her expression sympathetic. "I heard," Mrs. Henshaw said without preamble. "Arthur's clerk was in here not 10 minutes ago saying you'd broken off the engagement. Half the fort knows by now, I'd wager." "I'm sure they do," Clara said heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. "Mrs. Henshaw, I need to settle my account. I'll be leaving today." "Leaving? Child, where will you go?" Mrs. Henshaw wiped her hands on her apron and came to sit across from Clara. "You can't just wander off into the territory alone. It's not safe. And besides," she paused delicately, "people will talk even more than they already are." "Let them talk." Clara pulled out the small purse she'd retrieved from her room. All the money she had left in the world, a pitiful sum that wouldn't last a month. "I know what I'm doing." Mrs. Henshaw's eyes softened. "Do you? Or are you just running from one uncertainty to another?"
I'm running toward something, Clara corrected. Toward someone, toward a life that might be hard but will at least be honest. "The Indian man," Mrs. Henshaw said it quietly, without judgment. Clara met her eyes, waiting for condemnation. Instead, she saw something that looked almost like understanding. "My sister married a French trapper 40 years ago," Mrs. Henshaw said softly, "against our parents' wishes, against society's rules. They said she'd ruined herself, thrown her life away. She died 5 years ago, and you know what? She died happy. Died surrounded by her half-breed children and grandchildren. Died in the arms of a man who worshipped the ground she walked on." The older woman reached across the table and took Clara's hand. "Sometimes the safe choice isn't the right choice, dear. Sometimes love matters more than propriety." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "You don't think I'm mad?" "Oh, I think you're absolutely mad," Mrs. Henshaw said with a small smile. "But the best kind of mad, the brave kind." She squeezed Clara's hand and released it. "You don't owe me anything for the room. Arthur paid for a month in advance, and I'll not give him back a penny after the way he's been talking about you. Consider it a wedding gift, even if it's not the wedding anyone expected." "Thank you," Clara whispered, "for understanding, for not treating you like damaged goods." Mrs. Henshaw stood and returned to her bread dough. "I'm too old to care what people think, and I've seen too much of life to believe there's only one right way to live it. Now, you'll need supplies if you're heading out. Let me pack you some food at least. Can't have you starving before you find your young man." Within the hour, Clara had a small bundle of provisions, her reticule with Arthur's letters removed and burned in Mrs. Henshaw's stove, and a borrowed cloak that was warmer than her ruined traveling cape. She stood at the boarding house door, looking out at the fort's muddy streets, at the people going about their business, at the walls that suddenly seemed less like protection and more like a cage. "How do I get out without causing a scene?" Clara asked. Mrs. Henshaw smiled. "The east gate is used mostly for freight wagons. Guards there are less attentive than at the main gate. If you wait until mid-afternoon when they're changing shifts, you could probably walk right out." "You've done this before," Clara observed. "Let's just say you're not the first woman to realize she needed to leave this fort in a hurry," Mrs. Henshaw said cryptically. "Go with God, child, and if things don't work out,
Though I have a feeling they will, you always have a place here with me." Clara embraced the older woman, feeling tears threaten again. "Thank you for everything." "Thank me by being happy," Mrs. Henshaw said firmly. "Now go, before I start crying and ruin my reputation as a hardened old biddy." Clara waited until mid-afternoon, just as Mrs. Henshaw had suggested. She limped toward the east gate, her ankle protesting every step, but manageable with the help of a walking stick Mrs. Henshaw had provided. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the gate, certain someone would stop her, would demand to know where she was going, would sound an alarm. But the guards were indeed changing shifts, and in the confusion of one group leaving and another arriving, Clara simply walked through. One guard glanced at her, started to say something, then shrugged and turned away. Just another woman on an errand, nothing to worry about. Clara kept walking, forcing herself not to look back, not to run, despite every instinct screaming at her to hurry. The cottonwood stand was perhaps half a mile away, but it felt like miles. Every step was an act of will, of choosing this path over the safety of the fort behind her. What if Hawk wasn't there? What if he'd given up and left already? What if she reached the trees and found nothing but empty prairie and the reality of what she'd thrown away? But as she drew closer, she saw smoke, a thin tendril rising from the cottonwoods. Someone had made a fire. Someone was waiting. Clara's pace quickened despite her ankle's protest. She reached the edge of the trees and stopped, suddenly shy, suddenly aware of the enormity of what she was doing. She was choosing a life with a man she'd known for less than 2 weeks, a man from a completely different world, a man who'd promised her nothing but hardship and freedom. "Hawk?" Her voice came out barely above a whisper. For a moment, nothing, then movement in the trees, and Hawk appeared leading his horse. He stopped when he saw her, his expression carefully neutral, but Clara could see the tension in every line of his body. Clara. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a question combined. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the wooden hawk, holding it up so he could see it. "I've come to give you my answer." Hawk's breath caught. "You—" He seemed unable to finish the sentence. "I choose you," Clara said simply. "I choose freedom and hardship and an uncertain future if it means I get to spend it with you. I choose love over safety. I choose living over merely surviving." Her voice strengthened. "I choose you, Hawk, if you'll still have me."
For a heartbeat, Hawk stood frozen. Then he crossed the distance between them in 3 long strides and swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet despite her cry of surprise. His face was buried in her hair, and she felt his shoulders shake with something that might have been a laugh or a sob or both. "I wait," he said against her neck. "I wait and hope and pray to spirits that you come. But I fear—" "I'm here," Clara interrupted, pulling back enough to cup his face in her hands. "I'm here, and I'm not leaving, not ever." Hawk's eyes searched hers as though looking for doubt, for hesitation. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied him because he kissed her, deep and desperate and claiming. Clara kissed him back with equal fervor, pouring all her fear and hope and love into that single connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Hawk rested his forehead against hers. "You know what this means? You know what you give up?" "Everything that doesn't matter," Clara said firmly, "and I'm gaining everything that does. White people, they look at you different now, see you as—" He struggled for the word. "Traitor, squaw woman, savage's whore." Clara supplied the ugly terms matter-of-factly. "I know. Arthur made sure I understood exactly what I'd be giving up." Hawk's expression darkened. "He heard you?" "Only with words, and only because they were true. I am giving up respectability, safety, acceptance." Clara touched Hawk's face gently. "But I'm trading them for something more valuable, for being seen, for being chosen, for love." "Love," Hawk repeated softly, as though testing the word. In Lakota, we say, was de lakati, but is more than word, is, he touched his chest over his heart, here, deep, forever. Was de lakati, Clara repeated carefully. Teach me more, teach me everything. Hawk smiled, a full, genuine smile that transformed his face. Take lifetime to teach everything. You sure you want to spend lifetime with me? I'm sure, Clara said. Then, with a small laugh, though I should probably learn to ride properly before we go much farther. I've been walking for 20 minutes and my ankle is screaming. Hawk's expression faded to concern. He knelt and carefully examined her ankle through her boot. Still hurt, not heal all the way. I carry you. You can't carry me forever, Clara protested.
Can try, Hawk said seriously. Then, seeing her expression, he amended, but you right. You need learn ride, learn survive, learn many things. We start slow. First, he rose and helped her to a fallen log near his fire. You sit, rest, eat. Then we talk about where we go. Clara settled onto the log gratefully, accepting the dried meat and water Hawk offered. The fire crackled cheerfully, and beyond the trees the prairie stretched endlessly under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. For the first time and longer than she could remember, Clara felt at peace. "Where will we go?" she asked. Hawk sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "North, I think, away from fort, away from settlements. There are places, quiet places, where Lakota still live old way. My grandmother, she with small band, move with the seasons. Maybe," he hesitated, "maybe we go there if you want." "Your grandmother," Clara repeated. "Would she accept me?" "She see you with her heart, not her eyes," Hawk said. "She know what it is to love across divide. Her sister marry white fur trapper long time ago. Grandmother say love has no color, no tribe, only truth or not truth." "I'd like to meet her," Clara said softly. "She like you," Hawk predicted. "Say you brave, say you smart to choose Hawk." His lips quirked. "Say I lucky fool who not deserve you." Clara laughed, the sound bright and free. "She sounds wise." They sat in companionable silence for a while, eating and watching the sun move across the sky. Clara knew there would be hard days ahead, cold nights, hungry times, moments when she questioned their choice. But sitting here with Hawk's steady warmth beside her, with the whole wide world spread out before them and nothing but possibility ahead, she couldn't bring herself to regret a single decision that had led her to this moment. "Clara," Hawk said eventually, "I need know, you afraid of what come next?" Clara considered the question honestly. "Yes," she admitted, "I'm terrified. I don't know how to survive in the wilderness. I don't know your language or your customs. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this life." "But," Hawk prompted, sensing there was more. "But I'm more afraid of the alternative, of a life half-lived where I'm safe but suffocating, of dying without ever really having lived." Clara turned to face him fully. "With you, I'm afraid, but with Arthur, I would have been numb. I'd rather feel everything, the fear, the hardship, the joy, than feel nothing at all."
Hawk took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "You strong enough. I see it. You survive storm, survive loss, survive pain. You bend but not break, like willow tree, flexible but with deep roots." "I hope you're right," Clara whispered. "I right," Hawk said with quiet confidence, "and I help you, teach you, protect you. We protect each other, yes?" "Yes," Clara agreed. Then, with a smile, "Though I warn you, I'm a terrible student. I once spent 3 weeks trying to learn embroidery and ended up bleeding all over the sampler." Hawk laughed, a deep, genuine sound that Clara wanted to hear every day for the rest of her life. No need embroider, need track rabbit, skin deer, make fire, read weather, different skills. Much more useful, Clara agreed. Though I'll miss embroidery, it was the perfect excuse to sit indoors and avoid social calls. No social calls where we go, only sky and earth and us. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. That sounds perfect. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Hawk helped Clara onto his horse and mounted behind her. They rode slowly north, away from Fort Laramie, away from civilization, away from everything Clara had known. But she wasn't leaving, she was arriving at a life she'd never imagined, but somehow always needed. Arriving at a love that was wild and free and entirely her own choosing. Behind them, the fort grew smaller and smaller until it was just a dark shape on the horizon. Ahead, the plains stretched endlessly, full of promise and uncertainty in equal measure. Clara closed her eyes and let herself simply feel the steady rhythm of the horse's gait, the solid warmth of Hawk's chest against her back, the cool evening air on her face, the vast open sky above them. She was heading into the unknown. She had never felt more certain of anything in her life.
Chapter 7. Becoming. They traveled for 3 days before reaching the winter camp. Clara learned more in those 3 days than she had in all her years of formal schooling. She learned to read the sky for weather signs, to find water by watching where birds flew at dusk, to identify which plants were safe to eat, even buried under snow. She learned that silence between two people could be comfortable, even intimate, that not every moment needed to be filled with words. She learned that her body was stronger than she'd ever imagined. Her ankle healed more each day, her soft hands grew calluses, her back stopped aching from the unfamiliar posture of riding. She was transforming, cell by cell, into someone who could survive this land. Most importantly, she learned about Hawk. She learned he sang when he thought she was sleeping, old songs in Lakota that spoke of seasons and spirits and the interconnectedness of all things. She learned he had a wry sense of humor that emerged once his initial reserve melted. She learned he was patient beyond measure, never once showing frustration when she asked the same question 3 times or stumbled over Lakota pronunciation. And she learned that love could deepen with every shared sunrise, every quiet meal, every night spent wrapped in furs beneath impossible stars. On the evening of the 3rd day, they crested a small rise, and Clara saw smoke rising from a shallow valley below. Not just one fire, but several. A cluster of hide lodges arranged in a loose circle, with horses grazing nearby and children running between the structures despite the cold. "Home," Hawk said simply, and Clara heard the complex emotion in that single word: longing, fear, hope, uncertainty. "Are you sure they'll accept us?" Clara asked, her own nervousness rising. "After you've been gone so long?" "They Lakota," Hawk said. "They understand grief, understand need for solitude, but they also understand—" He paused, searching for words. "We are people who need each other, no one meant to walk alone forever." As they descended into the valley, figures emerged from the lodges. Clara saw women wrapped in blankets, men with long braided hair, children who stopped their playing to stare. An older man with a deeply lined face and a magnificent headdress stepped forward, raising one hand in greeting. Hawk responded in kind, then began speaking in rapid Lakota. Clara caught her own name and fragments she'd learned: storm, rescue, choice. The elder listened intently, his gaze moving from Hawk to Clara and back again. Finally, he spoke, a short sentence that made Hawk's shoulders visibly relax. "He say we are welcome," Hawk translated. "He say—" A slight smile touched his lips.
He say my grandmother will be very smug that she was right.
Right about what? She tell me 3 winters ago that I would not walk alone forever, that spirits had planned for me. Hawk helped Clara dismount. I not believe her. Now, he gestured between them, she will never let me forget. An ancient woman emerged from one of the lodges, moving with surprising speed for someone who had to be well past 70. She was tiny, barely reaching Hawk's chest, with a face so wrinkled it looked like crumpled leather, but her eyes were bright and sharp, missing nothing. She stopped in front of them and looked Clara up and down with an intensity that made Clara want to squirm. Then she said something in Lakota that made several nearby people laugh. "What did she say?" whispered Clara to Hawk. "She say you have good hips for bearing children, but you too skinny. She need to feed you." Hawk's expression was caught between amusement and mortification. "My grandmother very direct." The old woman spoke again, this time reaching out to touch Clara's hair, which had come loose from its pins during the journey. She made an approving sound, then turned to Hawk and launched into what was clearly a lecture, punctuated by gestures at Clara and occasional pokes to Hawk's chest. When she finally stopped, Hawk looked simultaneously chastened and relieved. "She say, I did good thing bringing you. She say you have strong spirit. She see it in your eyes. She say," she paused, "she say if I don't marry you properly in Lakota way, she will beat me with her walking stick." "I like her already," said Clara, which made the old woman laugh even though she couldn't have understood the English words. The next weeks passed in a blur of learning and adaptation. Clara was given a lodge to share with Hawk, a temporary arrangement until their marriage ceremony could be properly prepared, her grandmother explained through Hawk's translation. The Lakota had their own sense of propriety, it seemed, which was both similar to and completely different from what Clara had known in Boston. The women of the camp adopted her with varying degrees of warmth. Some were openly curious, teaching her how to properly tan hides, how to sew with sinew, how to cook over an open fire without burning everything. Others were more reserved, watching her with expressions that ranged from skeptical to hostile. Clara couldn't blame them. She was a white woman in a Lakota camp, a reminder of all the conflict and betrayal that had passed between their peoples. But slowly, through persistence and humility and genuine effort, she began to earn acceptance. She learned that respect was earned through action, not words. When she helped haul water without being asked, when she stayed up all night helping tend a sick child, when she practiced Lakota phrases until her tongue was numb, these things spoke louder than any protestations of good intentions. Hawk's grandmother, whose name was Washtewing, good woman, became Clara's fiercest advocate and harshest teacher. She corrected Clara's Lakota pronunciation with swats from a willow switch. She critiqued Clara's hide-working technique with blunt assessments that left no room for false praise. She demanded excellence and accepted nothing less. But she also braided Clara's hair in the Lakota style, told her stories by the fire, and called her Takoya, which Hawk translated as a term of endearment, meaning grandchild. "She say you family now," Hawk explained one evening as they sat outside their lodge, watching the sun set. "Not white, not Lakota, but something new. She say this is good thing, new ways for new times." Clara leaned against Hawk's shoulder, feeling more at home than she ever had in her father's Boston house. "I never imagined I could be happy living this way. Everything I was taught said civilization was superior, that this life was—" She stopped, ashamed of the words she'd once believed. "Savage," Hawk supplied quietly. "Primitive. Less than." "Yes," Clara admitted. "I'm sorry. I know better now." "You learn," Hawk said simply. "This good. Many white people never learn, never try. You try, you change. This take courage." "Or desperation," Clara said with a self-deprecating laugh. "No," Hawk turned her face toward his. "Courage. You could go back to fort any time, walk away,
choose easy road, but you stay, you work hard, you learn. This is courage." Clara kissed him, pouring gratitude and love into the gesture. When they broke apart, Hawk's eyes were soft. "Grandmother say we ready for marriage ceremony. She want do it before first moon of spring. She say," she smiled, "she say she too old to wait much longer for great-grandchildren." Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "She's certainly determined. She 90 winters old, maybe more. She allowed be determined." Hawk took Clara's hand. "But only if you ready. No rush. We have time." "I'm ready," Clara said without hesitation. "I've never been more ready for anything." The marriage ceremony took place on the first truly warm day of early spring, when the snow had finally melted and the prairie grass was beginning to show green. The entire camp gathered, perhaps 40 people in all, dressed in their finest clothing. Washtay-Wing had spent weeks preparing Clara's wedding dress, a deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork and dyed porcupine quills. It was the most beautiful thing Clara had ever worn, more precious than any silk gown from Boston, because every bead had been placed with love and intention. The ceremony itself was nothing like the stuffy church weddings Clara had attended back east. There was no altar, no preacher, no formal vows read from a book. Instead, they stood before the camp with Washtay-Wing and the elder, with the whole community bearing witness. Hawk wore his finest buckskins and had his hair elaborately braided with feathers and beads. He looked, Clara thought, like something out of a dream, noble and strong and entirely hers. The elder spoke in Lakota, words Clara only partially understood but felt in her bones. He spoke of the sky and earth coming together, of two people choosing to walk the same path, of the responsibilities of partnership. Washtay-Wing draped a blanket around both their shoulders, a symbol of their union, Hawk had explained earlier, of two lives becoming one shared warmth. Then Hawk spoke, his voice steady and clear. He spoke in Lakota first, then translated into English for Clara's benefit. "I choose you, Clara, to walk beside me through all seasons, to share fire in winter, to plant and harvest, to face hardship together. I promise to protect you, to provide for you, to listen to your wisdom. I promise to see you as you are, to value your strength, to honor your heart. I will be your partner, your friend, your love. This I vow before earth and sky, before spirits and people." Clara's eyes stung with tears as she responded with words Washtay-Wing had helped her memorize in Lakota, followed by her own English translation. "I choose you, Hawk, to walk beside me through all seasons, to share your burdens, to learn your ways, to build a life of honor. I promise to stand with you, to work beside you, to grow in wisdom. I promise to see you as you are, to value your strength, to honor your heart. I will be your partner, your friend, your love. This I vow before earth and sky, before spirits and people." The blanket was pulled tighter around them, and the elder pronounced them married in words that needed no translation. The camp erupted in celebration. Drums began to beat, people sang, and food that had been prepared over days was brought out for a feast. Clara found herself swept up in the celebration, passed from person to person as people offered congratulations and blessings. Women who had been cool to her before smiled warmly. Children who had stared shyly now came close to touch her dress and giggle. Even the most skeptical elders seemed to accept that she was now one of them. But it was Washtay-Wing's blessing that moved Clara most deeply. The old woman pulled her aside as the celebration continued and spoke in Lakota, with Hawk translating. "You came to us as stranger, but you leave ceremony as family. You have shown respect for our ways, worked hard to learn, never pretended to know what you did not. This is rare in white people. You have good heart, granddaughter. You will make strong children who walk in both worlds. This is gift, to bridge divide, to show new way is possible. Never forget where you come from, but never be ashamed of who you become." Clara embraced the old woman, tears flowing freely now. "Thank you," she whispered, "for accepting me, for teaching me, for loving me." "What else would I do?" Washtewing said, with Hawk translating, her tone gently teasing. "You family now. Family loves, even when difficult, especially when difficult." As night fell and the celebration continued around fires, Clara and Hawk finally slipped away to their lodge. Inside, everything had been prepared: fresh furs, a small fire burning, the air warm and private and theirs. Hawk pulled her close, his hands gentle on her waist. "You happy?" "Deliriously," Clara said honestly, "though I never imagined my wedding would involve quite so much dried buffalo and ritual drumming." Hawk laughed. "Better than Boston wedding?" "Infinitely better." Clara wound her arms around his neck. "Though I should probably tell you, I still can't tan a hide properly. My Lakota pronunciation makes children giggle, and I'm fairly certain I'll never be able to track anything more elusive than a particularly loud rabbit." "Good thing I not marry you for hide tanning skills," Hawk said, his voice dropping to that low, intimate register that made Clara's pulse race. "I marry you for brave heart, strong spirit, and stubborn determination to learn even when difficult." "And my excellent rabbit tracking abilities," Clara added solemnly. "Yes," Hawk agreed, his lips quirking, "mostly that." Their kiss was soft at first, tentative despite the ceremony that had just bound them together. But passion quickly bloomed, fed by weeks of proximity and restraint, by the knowledge that this was finally, completely, irrevocably right. As Hawk lowered her to the furs, as their new life together truly began, Clara sent up a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever spirits had guided her path. From Boston to a blizzard to this moment, it had been terrifying, uncertain, often painful.
But it had led her here, to this lodge, to this man, to this love that was worth every sacrifice, every hardship, every moment of doubt. She was no longer Clara Miller of Boston. She was Clara, wife of Hawk, member of the Lakota people, woman who had chosen freedom over security and found everything she'd never known she needed. She was home. Epilogue, 20 years hence. The spring of 1896 brought unusually warm weather to the Wyoming plains. Clara, now called Winyan Washte Hinapse, good woman who appears, though Hawk still called her simply Clara when they were alone, sat outside her lodge watching the children play. There were many children now, 3 of her own, 2 sons and a daughter, grown now and starting families of their own. Countless others she'd helped raise, in the Lakota way, where all children belonged to the whole community. And now, finally, grandchildren. Her eldest son's daughter, a wild-haired 4-year-old named Patanyatu, Autumn, sat in Clara's lap, demanding stories in the way only beloved grandchildren can. "Tell about the storm, grandmother," Patanyatu insisted. "Tell about when you met grandfather." "Again?" Clara teased, though secretly she loved telling this story. "I told you yesterday." "Tell again." Patanyatu bounced impatiently. So Clara told the story she'd told 100 times, of the blizzard, the rescue, the choice she'd made to leave behind everything she'd known for love and freedom. She told it in Lakota now, the language that had become as natural to her as English, though she made sure all her children and grandchildren learned both. "Were you scared?" Patanyatu asked, as she always did. "Terrified," Clara admitted. "But sometimes being brave means being scared and choosing anyway." "Like when I had to jump across the creek?" "Exactly like that,"
Clara agreed, smoothing the child's hair. Hawk emerged from the lodge, moving more slowly than he once had, but still strong, still capable. Silver streaked his hair now, and lines creased his face, but his eyes were the same dark, warm brown that had first captivated Clara 20 years ago.
He settled beside them with a contented sigh. "She making you tell Storm's story again?" "Of course," Clara said. "It's her favorite." "Because it good story," Hawk said, pulling Pietanyatu onto his lap. "Story of courage, of choosing love over fear, of grandmother who threw away everything to be with handsome, charming grandfather." "Handsome and charming," Clara repeated dryly. "Is that how you remember it?" "Is how I choose to remember," Hawk said with dignity, which made Pietanyatu giggle. Their eldest son, Tanka, approached with news. "Father, Mother, the agent from the fort has requested a meeting, something about new treaty negotiations. He specifically asked for you to be present, both of you." Clara and Hawk exchanged glances. Over the years, Clara had become something of a bridge between the Lakota and white authorities. Her ability to speak both languages, to understand both cultures, made her invaluable in negotiations. It was difficult work, often heartbreaking, but she did it gladly if it helped her people. And they were her people now, completely and irrevocably. "We'll go tomorrow," Hawk said. Then, to Pietanyatu, "Now, who wants to hear a story about time grandmother tried to cook her first buffalo stew and made something even horses refused to eat?" "Hawk!" Clara protested, but she was laughing. As evening fell and family gathered for the meal, as grandchildren ran and shouted, and elders told stories, and young people courted and babies nursed, Clara looked around at the life she'd built and felt profound gratitude. It hadn't always been easy. There had been hard winters when food was scarce, summers when disease swept through the camp, years when white authorities tried to force them onto reservations or separate their children into boarding schools. There had been losses and grief, and moments when Clara wondered if she'd made the right choice. But then Hawk would take her hand, or a grandchild would climb into her lap, or she would look out at the endless prairie and remember what freedom felt like. And she knew. She had made the right choice. Not the easy choice, not the safe choice, not the choice society would have approved of, but the right choice for her, the one that had led to this moment, this family, this life lived fully and without regret. As stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Hawk found her hand and squeezed gently. No words were needed. After 20 years, they rarely were. They had chosen each other in a blizzard, had built a life together against all odds, had created a family that bridged two worlds. They had survived hardship and celebrated joy, had aged together and grown together, had proven that love, real love, chosen love, could overcome any obstacle. Clara thought of Arthur sometimes, wondered what had become of him. She hoped he'd found his own happiness, his own suitable wife, his own version of a good life. There was no bitterness in her, only gratitude that she'd been brave enough to say no to security and yes to possibility. She thought of Mrs. Henshaw and her sister who had married the French trapper. She understood now what Mrs. Henshaw had meant about dying happy, about the brave kind of mad. But mostly, she didn't think about the past at all. She was too busy living in this moment, surrounded by the family she'd helped create, beside the man who had saved her in more ways than one. The winter hawk had taken flight, and she had flown with him into a life more beautiful than any cage could ever be. The end.
Dear listeners of Light Romantic Stories, thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed this, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the comments what city you're listening from. We'd love to hear from you.